Discussions in this show are for entertainment and educational purposes only and should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and SmartPro Financial are not affiliated.
Hey, Robin John, the CEO of Eventide, thank you so much for taking time to join us, talk to our listeners about the story of your company, which is really unique in the investment world. Can you please tell us about Eventide, about your story and the starting of this great company?
Yes, Eventide is an asset manager based in Boston, and we pursue what we call investing that makes the world rejoice. It is our approach to values-based investing from a biblical worldview. We seek to understand how to honor God and how to serve our clients and create value for the world through our investing. So really, the founding of Eventide started with me praying for purpose. When I was in college at Tufts University, I was praying for purpose. And then I had a few other jobs where, again, I'm continuing to pray for purpose. And I had a sacred secular mindset at the time. And I had a make all you can to give all you can mindset as well. And in my mind, I thought that to honor God through work, it meant that I had to go into the church ministry, into nonprofit work. And I also had this idea that maybe I work for some time in a way that's maybe less meaningful, so that later I could pursue my calling. And later, I ended up losing a job at the age of 27. And a good friend of mine named Finney, who I had co-founded a church with, he and I started praying together about initially it was about what Robin should do with his life in order to honor God. And as we were praying together, we just saw a huge need in the marketplace where, especially in the public investing marketplace, where we just saw such a disconnect between Christians, how they invested, and what their values are, what the Bible says about work, about business, and how that relates to investing. So we wanted to help bridge that gap between investors' values, Christian investors' values, and where they're actually investing. So we started Eventide. Eventide means the coming of the night in Old English. Jesus said in John that he must do his Father's work while it is still day, before the night comes. So when I say the word Eventide, it's a reminder to me that we have to do good work that is honoring to God before the night comes. We basically started this company, and our tagline is investing that makes the world rejoice. Mm-hmm. The Bible says, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. But when the wicked prosper, the people groan. So our form of investing really seeks to uplift our communities and serve our customers and employees and supply chains and the world, society well through investing.
And I know you guys believe that too. I've been to your headquarters and I've seen that tagline right there. It's on all your material. You bring it up all the time. You hear that because it's truly what you guys are trying to do. Like that's the purpose of the company, is identify areas in which you can help make the world rejoice with how capital is invested in the marketplace. Now, if somebody's listening to this and they hear values-based investing, they hear this overlay with Christianity, they might say, okay, can I invest in this if I'm not a person of faith? Does this matter for me? Or is this something that's maybe exclusionary to that? What would you say to someone that had that question?
Yeah, I would say that our form of investing appeals to everybody. We believe that this is good news for all investors. Ultimately, when you are trying to invest into companies that are loving neighbor, companies that are really seeking to create compelling value for the world, I believe this is something that everybody could get behind. Ultimately, the idea of investing in companies whose products are genuinely good, whose practices are genuinely good, I think these are the types of companies that all people would want to partner with.
So I know with our client base and our listeners, they tend to be politically a little bit more conservative, and they might hear values-based and think ESG. Can you explain, as values and ESG, are they one and the same? Is it a different word for the same thing? Or are these two entirely different mindsets when looking at investing?
Everybody has values, but not all of our values are aligned, right? Obviously there are very different values in this country when it comes to lots of topics. There are so many new conversations that are happening now that were not even happening 10 years ago. So when we say values-based investing, it's a form of investing that seeks to reflect values into investing versus removing values altogether from investing. So we're seeking to, rather than just focusing on profit, we're saying we should focus on profit, but also focus on what the impact the companies are having on the world. But that said, not everybody's values are the same. ESG is a subset of values-based investing that really caters to the more liberal values. And yet many Christians have more conservative, traditional, historic Christian values. And those values are not represented in the ESG conversation. So what I find almost disappointing is that Christians avoid values-based investing altogether, and they fail to bring their values into investing. And yet the ESG movement is promoting a lot of the values that the Christians don't agree with. So I actually think there's a huge opportunity for Christians to reflect their values in our investing.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And as far as those values, and when they actually, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is there any examples that as a company you guys go, that's something we got right, and we can see the impact and the mission and our tagline to make the world rejoice, investing that makes the world rejoice, we see that in action? Have you guys as a firm had those opportunities to say, okay, this is where we really got it right and where we see an impact that's been made?
Yes, I would say a lot of it came out of prayer. And, myself and Finney and our other founding members, we spent months fasting and praying together. Once a week, we would fast together and pray together. And ultimately, I really do believe that God allowed us to discover a framework for investing. So we have an avoid, embrace, engage framework. We want to avoid ill-gotten gain. Proverbs 1, verses 10 to 19, talks about avoiding ill-gotten gain and not profiting with people that are pursuing plunder, not even sharing a purse with people that pursue plunder. So historically, values-based investing has been about avoiding problem areas, avoiding things like pornography and tobacco. For the Christian person, it could be abortion, it could be gambling, right? So there's a list of things that we avoid investing in at Eventide. But I think the light bulb moment for us was when a person showed up at the prayer meeting at the house church that we were running. And that person said, you're starting at that time, he understood it to be a Christian mutual fund. I don't use those words together anymore. But he said, I know what it means to be a Christian. I know what a mutual fund is. Put that together for me. And we talked about avoiding ill-gotten gain. He said, well, that's great. But if you are allocating capital, why are you not asking the question about where Christians should allocate capital. So really, I think what makes Eventide's approach really special for me is that we don't just avoid ill-gotten gain. We're actively pursuing, we're trying to find the companies that we believe are truly creating value for the world. And so, Romans 12 says, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. So we want to try to bring both of those components into our investment framework.
That's fantastic. I know, listening to some of even the public videos that you guys have online talking about your company, there seems to be direct impact in the marketplace and certain industries. And I think, of the solar industry, where you guys made a direct impact with looking at how that was being manufactured with, forced labor, and saying, okay, this is a problem. We've identified it. Now, how do we come up with a solution for this? And how do we educate even CEOs of these companies that may not even have known this was happening, to come up with solutions? And I think that another one that I know you guys have shared in the past was, and this will speak to a lot of our fans that are Ramsey fans, it's all about getting out of debt and living a debt-free lifestyle, is companies that were charging egregiously high interest rates on credit cards, and being able to have those conversations of, hey, this isn't right, and fixing those. And I think those are just really interesting stories of how your organization, how Eventide has directly gone to the marketplace and made a difference for consumers and investors, which is incredibly important, and what people are facing now.
Yes. So that's that third component: avoid, embrace, engage. And so it's been really amazing to see the power of the change that we could make when we collectively work together. I think because Eventide is stewarding capital for many investors, we're able to approach companies and ask questions and challenge them on something like a credit card rate. This was a very large retailer that probably didn't have to listen to Eventide, but they did. And you mentioned the solar example. We were investing in solar just from an environmental standpoint, a clean energy standpoint. But then we found out that there was slave labor in the supply chain in Western China. There's a people group in Western China called the Uyghur people. These are ethnic and religious minorities in China. They are Muslims, and the Chinese government wants to re-educate them and convert them. And so the men were being locked up in re-education camps and being forced into labor, and American companies were profiting from that, including solar supply chains. The wives and children were being basically abused and raped, and things like that. Very bad things were happening in a place called Xinjiang in Western China. And ultimately, we engaged and we showed companies that there's slave labor in the entire supply chain, from the mining of the metallurgical polysilicon all the way to the creation of the cells, the wafers, ingots, all the way to the solar panels. We talked to other investors. We even wrote white papers, and I know one of our people even went to Washington, D.C. to have a meeting about this. And ultimately, I don't want to take any credit or have Eventide take any credit. I know many investors and politicians and others were very involved in the conversation, but a lot of these changes, companies did make changes, but a lot of the changes that we saw didn't go far enough. So we ultimately had to divest. So for example, what a lot of these companies did is they created a bifurcated supply chain, and the cleaner supply chain came into the US, and the tainted supply chain went to other parts of the world. We said to those companies, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
So we have to divest from some of the companies. But again, as investors, I think we do the best we can. We care about where our profits are coming from. We also care to have an impact through the capital that we're allocating.
That's incredibly interesting. That last part where you said the way of cleaning up was we'll do good on this side that we send to the United States, but the rest of it we'll still use these practices that are reprehensible because these countries maybe don't have the resources or the ability to identify and stop it. Wow, that's very interesting. This is just an aside and really your opinion. Do you feel like this was a one-off event that this one industry in this one area, or do you feel like these kinds of practices could be across the globe in different manufacturing and different environments?
It's everywhere. So it takes a lot of research. So our analyst team here is digging deep into every company we invest in. So they're looking at how the companies are engaging with their customers, their employees, their supply chains, their host communities, environment, and society. The biggest challenge probably for them is uncovering supply chain issues,
Okay.
especially in other parts of the world. When you're dealing with a place like China, many years ago, I don't know if you know the example of Foxconn. It was a supplier that many American companies were working with. Foxconn had to put a safety net around their building because their employees were jumping off and trying to commit suicide. So these labor conditions in other parts of the world can be very bad. And I often think about the story of King David when he was in the cave of Adullam. This is towards the end of his life. And the Bible says that David was thirsty, and he says he was hiding from the Philistines. And he says, oh, I wish I could have water from a well in Bethlehem that he's used to drinking from. And his mighty men, his soldiers, his employees overheard him. The Bible says they put their lives at risk. They go through the enemy camp, get the water, bring it back to their king, their employer. And the Bible says that King David pours the water in front of them and tells them, I cannot drink this water. It's because his men took on too much risk for his benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if Christians in America who are shareholders in these companies thought that way, that we care about the risk that employees are taking. We care about the risk that supply chain employees are taking. We don't want to squeeze blood out of these people in order to just get a little bit more profit into the bottom line.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think that side of it, the bigger picture, when you bring that in, is very powerful, because I know that there's skeptics and detractors, and from that you guys face, but also that on our end, people go, well, if I invest this way, my potential over the years for growth is diminished. And that's the worry. So it feels like I'm having to give something up. If I'm going to do good on this side, I'm giving up something on this side, which maybe is security or hitting their goals or whatever it may be. Could you speak to that? Is that true, or is that not?
I don't think it is, personally. So when I look at the data, there's a group called the BRI Institute, stands for Biblically Responsible Investing Institute. They've done a lot of work in this area, and they looked at data going back to 1990. I haven't looked at the data recently, but from 1990 to 2020, 30-year period, they looked at how a portfolio would perform if you just screen out the basic Christian concerns, like abortion, pornography, tobacco. I believe they included alcohol, violent video gaming, gambling. But if you just screen those things out from a negative standpoint, how would that portfolio do compared to the S&P 500 without the screens? Every year, there's a slight outperformance or a slight underperformance. But over the 30-year period, they showed that the performance was exactly identical for both the screened and the non-screened portfolios. I believe that when you then add the positive factors like employee happiness, customer and net promoter score, these types of things lead to, I believe, a virtuous cycle inside of a company. And ultimately, it's like what the Southwest Airlines CEO said. He said, we take great care of our employees so that they could take great care of our customers, so that they could take great care of our shareholders. So companies that create these cultures of happiness, of well-being, of just loving others, generally over the long term, I believe, are just better investments.
No, and I think that there's probably a lot to that, of going, okay, an organization that's got the right culture and is doing things the right way long term, that's the place that I would rather be, and that's the place I would rather work. I would rather have some of my friends working there, my family. Like, that's the organization you want. And you have to think over time, the good defeats, what is bad. And you have to assume that those, in my point of view, are great places to be, and they just have to stay that way. So a lot of what you guys do is have this research and you're finding these companies. How do you make sure they stay I wouldn't say in line, but stay in the framework of how you guys are wanting to invest capital, how Eventide looks at investing?
We are constantly engaging companies and talking to not just management teams, but also talking to industry experts, key opinion leaders within the industry. And of course, being an investment firm, we have to follow all the compliance frameworks to make sure that we don't get information that we shouldn't be receiving. But really understanding company culture and maintaining that understanding is very important to us. I actually do believe that's a kind of a competitive advantage that Eventide has. We're not just looking at financials, but we're looking at management practices, how management thinks about value creation for their customers and employees. And we do that at the industry analyst level. Each analyst is supposed to really try to master a specific industry. But we also have an independent team here that we call the Business 360 team that are also engaging that.
Okay.
And they get data from all places, including a lot of the values-based investment data providers are also providing data to us.
Okay.
Discussions in this show are for entertainment and educational purposes only and should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and SmartPro Financial are not affiliated.
Well, I want to switch gears here for a moment and kind of bring up something that I know we face as an organization, as a company. And I know that you probably have felt some of these headwinds as well. Before I get into that, congratulations on launching Eventide's ETFs. I think that's really interesting as that space continues to grow. But what I want to focus on is the mutual funds for a moment. And the reason I bring this up is because we as an organization or as any advisor probably feels that pressure of saying, hey, just be in the indexes, just be in the index, passive investing, mutual funds, actively managed accounts, actively managed mutual funds. Maybe this isn't the future. And what you tend to get in that environment is you just own it all. So everything that we've talked about so far in that world just doesn't exist. It's not part of the thinking. So how have you guys dealt with some of those headwinds of going, no, we think actively managed, identifying great companies to own, making sure they're doing things the right way is proper and right? And then my second question to that is that's hard enough for most companies to do. That's hard enough for most organizations and most investment firms, mutual fund companies to be able to do that and fight this battle against indexes. But then you layer on this extra level of complexity, which is, and they have to fit our screens, which could eliminate some companies that are seeing tremendous growth. Some of the top companies and an S&P may not meet those screens, which can make it very difficult. So how have you addressed those concerns as an organization, or do you view them as concerns?
So when I think about that question, I think about Romans 12, right? It says, I beseech you therefore, brothers, in view of God's mercies, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, for this is your spiritual act of worship. And verse 2 says, do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may test and approve God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. So as Christians, I don't think we are allowed, I don't think we should or we can do anything passively, because that means we're conforming to the patterns of the world.
Mhm.
So I think we have to be so thoughtful that we don't just get swept into the ways of the world, but rather that we're thinking critically about what God would want us to do. So let me give you an example from Revelation. There is, earlier I mentioned the passage from Proverbs 1 about ill-gotten gain. In Revelation, there's a chapter where it talks about Babylon. Babylon represents the world's economy. And the way that Babylon is described, there are good things and bad things happening, right? It says the merchants of Babylon, they are buying and selling bread. Seems like a good thing to do, right? It says they are buying and selling men and the souls of men. So human trafficking and slavery, not a good thing, right? So then it goes on to say, Apostle John is writing to the church, come out from out of Babylon. So he's saying Christians, church, don't engage in the world's economy, though the world is engaging. And imagine if Babylon had a Babylon 500.
Yeah.
I would assume that John is saying to the Christians, don't invest in the Babylon 500. I don't know why the S&P 500 is any different, right? You have so many tobacco companies in there, Philip Morris International, Altria Group, British American Tobacco, Japan Tobacco. You got pornography in there. You got abortifacients in there. You got gambling. All of these issues are in the S&P 500. So if you take that framework that I said earlier about not conforming to the patterns of the world, I do think Christians should think about what is, even from an index, more passive standpoint, what does that look like for the Christian? What are the values that we have to seek to reflect, even in a more passive portfolio, which ultimately means that you're more active than an index fund ever could be.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's interesting because I know it's something that, we face at times where it's just, give up on it. And we don't think that's right. We're very steadfast in that, again, going back to our client base and our company culture is very much rooted with what the Ramsey Group talks about. And he's, Dave Ramsey all the time, be in these 4 groups of actively managed mutual funds. And so for our clients, there's that conditioning for that. But I know at times it can be very tempting to just say, you know what, I'm going to do it on my own and I'm just going to do this over here. And, for some people, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow to do it another way. But I also think that your point is well taken. One of the things that I learned more recently, and I won't say the name of the company, but it's one that's in, the top 10 of the S&P, has about 40% of all pornography web traffic that flows through that company. And it's somebody that I would not even have thought, because my first thought of their line of business isn't that. Because I've always wondered, I was like, well, what is, when I hear something like when you just listed, there's gambling, there's alcohol, tobacco, and then pornography. I'm like, well, what? I don't know. I don't know who that would be. And then I started learning, no, this is how it works. It's who hosts these sites. And, oh, did you know that human trafficking is that pornography is one of the biggest components with human trafficking? You're like, oh, okay, now I'm seeing how this is linked. And so there's a lot of companies that do things that you wouldn't necessarily go, oh, that's part of their business model until you dig deeper. And most people are just not willing to dig deeper. They don't have the time to dig deeper. They don't want to. What's the point? How am I going to stop it? I'm not going to make a difference. That kind of attitude can lead to just complacency. And I think that's happening a lot with people. And if they knew exactly what they are investing in or what they stood for, they go, these things are totally at odds with my value. Whether you're Christian or not, you go, these are at odds with my values and how I want my family to be and how the country I want to be in. They don't make sense. And so I do find that very interesting. But one of the things I also think is very unique to Eventide is that you guys have this way of looking at investing, but you also, one of the things that you excel in is more in the healthcare space. And most people would assume, well, you can't be there. The healthcare space has got to just be ripe with all these bad actors. And there's going to be all kinds of things that are happening, whether it's testing, whether it's, abortion, what's going on here that allows you guys to excel. And also what what allows you to be equipped to do so well in that space?
Yes. So before I answer that, let me go back to the point you made earlier. So it is very possible to be in the asset classes that Dave Ramsey promotes and still reflect your values. So I recently had our team run an analysis. If you just take 150 companies out of the Russell 1000, which is the largest 1,000 companies, you could have tracking error as low as 2.5%. And 1.5% of the 2.5% comes from the FANG stocks, right? And Eventide doesn't invest in most of that. But again, 2.5% tracking error is not a huge amount of tracking error to be able to reflect your value. So we can build portfolios that aligns with biblical values and that behaves like, when I say behavior, I'm talking about tracking error, beta, standard deviation, more like the asset classes that the investors are used to investing in. So now coming back to your question around healthcare, it is an area of a lot of value creation, but also an area with lots of concern that we have to be careful to navigate properly. So abortion is a major issue. Stem cell, embryonic stem cell, and abortifacients, these are all major issues in the biotech space that we have to be very careful how we are investing, where we're investing. Of course, Planned Parenthood issues are there, and we seek to have a 0% threshold to anything that's abortion related, whether it's Planned Parenthood, whether it's abortifacients, embryonic stem cell. But that said, biotech, healthcare also has huge opportunities, maybe more than any other industry, in terms of identifying value creation and partnering with that. So just to give a few examples without naming companies, I remember 2 years ago, I attended the funeral of a young woman who was about 30, who committed suicide. Her dad's a missionary and would constantly call me to pray for her. And she had schizophrenia. She would hear voices in her head. She had 2 young daughters who were at the time like 2 and 3 years old. And one day she went missing and they found her. She went to a gun shop and somehow bought a gun, and without any background checks. And at that time, I remember thinking, like, we have a company in our portfolio that is dealing with schizophrenia and trying to bring a treatment to schizophrenia. And these treatments that are in the space today are more than 50 years old. There hasn't been any advancement in that space. And yet the company we were investing in was very close to getting an FDA approval. So I was just thinking at that time, imagine if that product was available to this person before this tragedy happened. Most of the homeless population in America deals with schizophrenia, and that's the major driver of homelessness in America. So rather than kind of addressing the branches, imagine addressing the root problems of some of these major issues of our country. I remember investing in a company and watching a video, and myself and Finney, we got emotional, tearful just watching the video. 1 in 30,000 boys in America deal with an issue called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And basically, by the age of 5, 6, 7, they're in a wheelchair. Their muscles are breaking down on them. By the age of 20 to 25, generally they pass away. And we invested in a company whose research and whose therapy was having these kids come out of wheelchairs and reversing the impact. And they were running up and down stairs, kids who were previously in a wheelchair. So when you invest in companies like this, we're investing in cancer research, oncology companies. It's just incredible to see the impact we could have through our investing. And I think, especially in biotech and healthcare, there is huge opportunity for innovation and value creation.
I also think with what I've seen from visiting your headquarters and listening to the team, you guys are uniquely qualified to find great opportunities in that space because of the team assembled at Eventide. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, my co-founder, Finney, he is a scientist. He is a doctor. So before we started Eventide, his academic background is from Harvard, MIT, and Caltech. He's got an MD and a PhD from Harvard, and he was a practicing physician. And he also had a lot of experience in private venture investing in biotech. So Finney brought the biotech science expertise. And what we've done is built a team of biotech investors that really are scientists that could understand, because a lot of the companies we invest in are more early stage biotech companies, companies that are generally in phase 2, phase 3 of the clinical trial process. They are pre-revenue. And so really the key to investing in these companies, the key to understanding their risk profiles is understanding whether they could get an FDA approval or not. So what we've done is built a team within the biotech industry of people that are MD, PhDs.
And you guys have a deep bench of individuals. And does your location, this is something I've just was pondered, does your location being in Boston help with that? Because I think most of our listeners, they go, wait a minute, here's this Christian-based investment firm and they're in Boston, Massachusetts. Like they're not in Birmingham, Alabama, or Atlanta, Georgia, or Charlotte, North Carolina. Like this is not traditionally, historically, yes, traditionally in modern times, no, this is not your typical location, for a company that has the stances and the values that Eventide does. But does that location help you find really interesting talent to walk in your doors to help?
Yes, yes, you're right. First of all, that, there's a lot of evangelism to be done in Boston. And, but at the same time, it is an area of lots of biotech innovation and an area with lots of expertise in terms of public investing. Lots of the large mutual funds and hedge funds are based here in Boston, and biotech, private equity, and venture firms are based in Boston. But just a lot of talent when it comes to biotech investing and broad investing are found here in Boston, technology investing. And also we recruit from places like Harvard Business School and MIT Sloan. So there's a huge advantage here of being connected to those schools. We're connected to the Christian focus, the universities of those schools, but even broader. We try to build a diverse culture here of people that are, but still very aligned with our mission and values.
Yeah, no, and I think you could definitely see that in what you guys are doing and the team that has been assembled. So I know that people that are listening to this are going to want to know more about Eventide, know more about particularly your story and what this company is trying to do. And for them, they'll have that opportunity because in February, you have a book coming out for pre-order. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and give a preview?
Yes, the name of the book will be To Make the World Rejoice. And I am so excited about this book. There's a person named Win Collier who helped me to write the book. Win wrote the book, A Burning in My Bones, by the biography of Eugene Peterson. So he's just a wonderful storyteller. He used to be a financial advisor and is a pastor. And basically what this book does is it goes through my life story and then goes through this founding story of Eventide. And ultimately it's mixed with stories, deep theology, and practical advice to the investor. So part of the book, I think part of my aim in the book was to lead people through my thinking as a Christian, and my hope is that the reader would come to the same understandings that I have come to when it comes to faith and work and faith and investing.
No, that's fantastic. I look forward to that. And outside of your book that you have coming out, can you tell us how people can follow you on social?
Yes, I have accounts on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts are newer.
Okay.
The handle is Robin John, but please connect with me. I would love to, basically I try to share something at least on a weekly basis, something very focused on faith and work, faith and investing.
Oh, that's perfect. Robin John, the CEO of Eventide, thank you so much for your time spent with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's an honor.
Thank you so much for joining us on Smart Pro Radio, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and you want to find more, go to smartprofinancial.com. Under our news and research tab, you'll be able to see prior episodes that we've had with amazing guests like Rachel Cruz and George Camel. Also, make sure to tune in February 3rd, where I'm going to be hosting Jim and Wanda Sharp from Pride Plumbing to listen to their amazing story of growing a fantastic business. Tune in then. Thanks.